The possibility that Al Nassr could be willing to put forward a figure close to €280 million for Kylian Mbappe is not just another piece of news in the hectic transfer market. We are not dealing with a simple rumor, nor with a conventional operation. We are facing a scenario that, if it were to materialize, could radically transform not only Real Madrid's immediate present, but also the club's strategic planning over the next 10 years. It would be, without exaggeration, one of the most significant decisions of the modern era of the club. Because selling a player like Mbappé would not simply mean letting go of a star. It would mean completely rethinking the sporting, financial, and even institutional structure of the project. We are talking about a footballer who represents much more than on-pitch performance. Mbappé is a global brand, a media phenomenon, a figure capable of generating impact in every corner of the planet. His name goes beyond football. It is synonymous with entertainment, marketing, influence, and international reach. When Real Madrid pursued his signing, it did so with the conviction that it was bringing in the natural heir to the global throne. The player destined to lead the club's next great era. The visible face of a new generation. The cornerstone around which a winning cycle could be built to extend the institution's historic dominance. His arrival was not just a transfer, it was a statement of power, a demonstration that Real Madrid remained the ultimate destination for the best footballers in the world. However, football rarely follows a perfect script. Expectations, no matter how enormous, do not always translate into an identical reality. And although Mbappé has amply demonstrated his extraordinary talent, the reality is that his integration into Real Madrid's ecosystem has sparked debates that go far beyond his individual statistics. On one hand, no one can dispute that he is one of the most decisive players of his generation. His ability to break matches open is exceptional. His pace is devastating. His explosiveness in tight spaces makes him a constant threat. He possesses refined technique, outstanding goal-scoring ability, and a competitive instinct reserved for the elite. In any context, Mbappé is a player capable of making a difference on his own. But elite football is not built solely on individual talent. Great teams are not sustained only by isolated moments of brilliance from their stars. They are built on collective balance, automatisms, shared sacrifice, and a solid tactical structure. And it is precisely in this area that the main doubts arise. Mbappé's presence has forced Real Madrid to reconfigure multiple aspects of its functioning. From the distribution of attacking spaces to pressing after losing possession, including offensive hierarchies and the division of responsibilities. Incorporating a player of such magnitude requires adjusting the entire ecosystem to maximize his strengths. And that inevitably generates side effects. Too often, the team has shown a certain lack of harmony in its play. Ball circulation has not always been fluid. The connection between lines has been irregular. And at times, the team has seemed more dependent on individual actions than on a consolidated collective structure. It is a feeling that has appeared in important matches and has fueled a legitimate debate among analysts, fans, and the wider environment. The big question, therefore, is as simple as it is profound. Has Mbappé made Real Madrid better as a team? Not as a sum of talent, but as a collective. Because a squad can accumulate stars and still fail to reach its full collective potential. Football history is full of examples. Real Madrid, in fact, knows this reality very well. Its most glorious eras have not always coincided with its most star-studded squads, but rather with those that achieved a near-perfect balance between quality, sacrifice, hierarchy, and cohesion. Teams in which every player understood their role and worked for a shared idea. Mbappé, by virtue of his stature, inevitably alters any structure. His presence conditions tactical decisions, modifies roles, redefines hierarchies, and concentrates a huge share of media attention. This is not necessarily negative. It is simply the natural consequence of signing a superstar of his level. But it does force the entire environment to adapt. And that adaptation is not always easy. Some players have had to modify their usual movements. Others have seen their level of prominence reduced. Some have taken on responsibilities different from those that best suit their strengths. When a team must adjust so many pieces around a single figure, the risk of losing natural flow and balance increases considerably. This does not mean, in any way, that Mbappé has been a problem on a personal or professional level. Far from it. His competitive commitment, ambition, and winning mentality are widely recognized qualities. The debate is not about his attitude, but about the complexity of integrating such a high-profile figure into a collective project. That is why Al Nassr's offer takes on extraordinary significance. Because it does not only represent an astronomical figure, it represents an opportunity to redefine the project. €280 million would allow Real Madrid to undertake a major strategic rebuild. We are talking about an amount capable of financing multiple elite signings, strengthening key positions, and ensuring the team's competitiveness for many years. In addition, the wage savings would also be significant. Freeing up one of the highest contracts in the squad would provide enormous financial flexibility. The club could redistribute resources, renew important players, accelerate priority signings, and maintain intact its financial strength, one of the great pillars of Florentino Perez's management. From a strictly business standpoint, the operation would be difficult to match. Rarely does an opportunity arise to generate such a high return on a single asset, especially in a market where major transfers are increasingly complex to execute. However, the decision cannot be based solely on accounting criteria. Real Madrid is not just any company. It is an institution whose very purpose is to compete and win at the highest level. Therefore, the central question is not how much money would be generated, but whether Mbappé's departure would strengthen or weaken the sporting project. And here a fascinating hypothesis emerges, that selling Mbappé, rather than representing a step backwards, could become an opportunity to build a more balanced, more collective, and perhaps more difficult-to-beat team. Without the need to adapt the system to such a dominant figure, the coaching staff would have greater freedom to enhance the collective strengths of the squad. Young players with enormous talent could take on greater responsibility. Attacking patterns could become more varied. The team could recover a more natural structure, less dependent on a single focal point. In addition, the dressing room could experience a more organic redistribution of leadership. New hierarchies would emerge. Other players would step forward. And at times, this kind of transition can strengthen team identity and internal cohesion. It would not be the first time that Real Madrid has reinvented itself after the departure of a superstar. The club's history is full of examples where an apparent loss ultimately became the beginning of a new successful era. The institution has consistently demonstrated an extraordinary ability to evolve, adapt, and continue competing at the highest level. Of course, parting ways with Mbappé would also involve risks. Replacing his offensive output would not be easy. Finding a player with his game-breaking ability is practically impossible. The market offers very few comparable profiles. And losing a player of that caliber always means giving up an individual competitive advantage. But modern football has repeatedly shown that collective performance can outweigh even the absence of extraordinary talent. A well-structured, balanced, and committed team can reach higher levels than a collection of misaligned individual stars. In the end, the potential Al Nassr offer places Real Madrid at a historic crossroads. Keeping Mbappé means continuing to build a project around one of the biggest stars in world football. Selling him, on the other hand, would open the door to a deep restructuring of the squad, with extraordinary resources and a level of strategic freedom that is difficult to imagine. There is no simple answer. Both options have strong arguments. Both carry risks and opportunities. But precisely for that reason, this decision would have a monumental impact. Because it would not simply be about selling a player. It would be about deciding what kind of Real Madrid the club wants to be in the next decade. One built around an absolute superstar, or one constructed through collective balance, squad depth, and a more distributed model of protagonism. And that, ultimately, is the true magnitude of this potential operation. It would not just be a record transfer. It would be a choice of model, philosophy, and future. One of those decisions that end up defining an era. For this reason, the potential departure of Kylian Mbappé should not be interpreted, at least not automatically, as a sporting catastrophe or an institutional defeat for Real Madrid CF. In elite football, major transformations are often preceded by bold, even uncomfortable decisions. And in this case, the departure of a superstar of such magnitude could open an extremely valuable door. The opportunity to completely redesign the club's sporting model in order to adapt it to the demands of the present and, above all, the future. Because beyond the media impact that an operation of this magnitude would generate, what would truly matter is everything the club could build from it. A sale close to €280 million would give Real Madrid exceptional flexibility in the transfer market. It would not simply be a matter of replacing one player with another, but of using those resources to strengthen multiple areas of the squad and raise the overall level of the team. That is precisely the key difference between a strategic rebuild and a simple impulsive reaction. The objective would not be to find a new icon to occupy the same media space, but to build a much more balanced, functional, and sustainable structure. A squad designed to compete at the highest level for many years, with a more intelligent distribution of talent and greater harmony across all lines. With an investment of that magnitude, the club would have the opportunity to strengthen several strategic positions simultaneously. It could sign a midfielder with great physical presence, pressing ability, and attacking contribution. It could also add a versatile forward, capable of interpreting different roles in the attacking line and integrating naturally into a collective system. And, of course, it could secure the arrival of an elite defender who provides leadership, solidity, and security at the back. This would allow the construction of a much more complete squad. Deeper, more flexible, better prepared to face the demands of a modern season, where fixture congestion, competitive intensity, and the need for rotation make squad depth a decisive factor. In addition, Mbappe's departure would bring a substantial transformation to the team's offensive structure. Currently, the presence of such a dominant figure tends to concentrate much of the play around him. Decisions, movements, and often the very attacking identity of the team revolve around that main focal point. However, without such a dominant reference, the attack could evolve towards a much more collective model. A model in which responsibility is distributed among several players. In which threats emerge from different areas of the pitch. In which unpredictability becomes one of the team's greatest strengths. And that, in modern football, is a huge advantage. Offensive systems with multiple threat sources are considerably harder to defend against. They force opponents to divide their attention, complicate tactical preparation, and create constant uncertainty in defensive structures. When danger can come from any area of the pitch, the opponent's ability to anticipate is drastically reduced. Moreover, this offensive diversity promotes much smoother ball circulation. The game becomes less rigid, less predictable, and more dynamic. Off-the-ball movement becomes more important, combinations increase, and the team more frequently finds spaces between the lines. In essence, the collective becomes stronger. And when the collective strengthens, the team usually reaches a higher competitive level. But the impact of such a departure would not be limited to the tactical level. It could also have deeply positive effects on the internal ecosystem of the dressing room. The presence of a global superstar, while undeniably valuable, can naturally alter certain internal dynamics. Hierarchy becomes concentrated. Media focus becomes monopolized. Expectations become unbalanced. And at times, this can generate tension, comparisons, or even dependencies that ultimately affect the overall functioning of the group. The departure of such a dominant figure would allow those dynamics to be rebalanced. It would encourage a more natural distribution of responsibilities. It would reduce potential status-related friction and foster healthier, more meritocratic internal competition, more focused on performance. When all players feel that their role is truly important, when they sense that playing time and prominence must be earned each week on the pitch rather than being dictated by name or reputation, the level of commitment tends to increase significantly. And with that, collective performance also rises. Such environments are often especially fertile for the development of young talents. Players who, in a less constrained context, find more space to take on responsibility, develop leadership, and establish themselves as key pieces of the project. All of this becomes even more relevant in light of a possible change in the dugout. Carlo Ancelotti has been a pivotal figure in one of the most successful periods in the club's recent history. His ability to manage complex dressing rooms, his experience, and his extraordinary competitive understanding have been fundamental pillars of Madrid's success in recent years. However, even the most glorious cycles eventually come to an end. And everything suggests that Real Madrid could be approaching a new turning point. In that scenario, the name of Jurgen Klopp emerges strongly. A coach with a radically different footballing identity, defined by intensity, energy, high pressing, aggressive competitiveness, and a deeply collective understanding of the game. Klopp's teams are recognizable from the very first minute. They compete with fierce intensity. They press in a coordinated manner. They attack with verticality. They defend as a unit. And, above all, they demand absolute commitment from every player. In his model, there are no exceptions. Every player must actively participate in all phases of the game. Every piece must fulfill precise roles with and without the ball. Pressing after losing possession, defensive cover, off-the-ball runs, rational occupation of space, and tactical discipline are non-negotiable elements. No one is exempt from effort. No one is above the system. And it is precisely here where a potential structural incompatibility with a profile like Mbappé could arise. This is not, in any way, about questioning his extraordinary individual quality, which is beyond discussion. It is simply about analyzing fit from a purely functional perspective. Klopp's football demands constant physical and mental commitment. It requires aggressive, sustained, and perfectly synchronized pressing. It demands sacrifice, discipline, and total involvement in collective work. Not all great talents adapt in the same way to this type of ecosystem. That is why a rebuild without Mbappé could fit much more naturally with the German coach's demands. It would be the ideal opportunity to build a team specifically designed for his model. A team tailored to his principles. A squad configured to maximize system performance over individual brilliance. With the resources generated, the club could undertake a deep and highly strategic rebuild. A midfielder with stamina, intensity, and the ability to sustain a high press. A versatile forward, intelligent in movement and committed to defensive work. A dominant center-back capable of defending large spaces behind him and leading a high defensive line. Profiles, not just names. Functions, not just starters. The key would be to identify players who improve overall team functioning. Players capable of elevating collective performance, enhancing those around them, and integrating into a coherent and competitive tactical structure. This approach would allow Real Madrid to recover an even more defined footballing identity. An intense team. Aggressive. Vertical. Hard-working. Organized. Capable of dominating matches not only through individual talent, but through pressing, coordination, intelligent space occupation, and collective strength. A team that imposes its rhythm. That controls games through structure. That is as brilliant with the ball as it is committed without it. Because, ultimately, that is the true essence of modern football. Success does not depend solely on assembling the best players. It depends on building an ecosystem in which those players can perform at their maximum capacity. A structure that enhances their strengths, minimizes their weaknesses, and transforms individual talent into collective output. And that is where the real opportunity lies. Mbappé's potential departure does not necessarily have to symbolize the end of an unfulfilled era. It could, in fact, represent the beginning of a new one. An era based on balance, functionality, cohesion, and competitive sustainability. An era in which Real Madrid does not depend on a single star, but on the strength of a project. Because great dynasties are not built solely around names. They are built around ideas, structures, principles. And sometimes, letting go of an extraordinary figure does not mean becoming weaker. It means evolving. Mbappé will continue to be, with or without Real Madrid, one of the best footballers on the planet. His talent is unquestionable, his ability to decide matches is reserved for very few, and his media impact goes beyond the sporting sphere. We are talking about a generational player, one of those who appear only once in a while and who have the capacity to define an era. His pace, his finishing ability, his intelligence in movement, and his knack for deciding big matches make him an absolutely decisive figure. However, recognizing the greatness of an individual footballer does not necessarily mean concluding that he is the perfect fit for any context, any system, or any stage in a club's history. Football, above all individual brilliance, remains a collective sport. And history has shown countless times that even the best players in the world need the right ecosystem to maximize their performance and, above all, to ensure that their presence contributes to the team's overall success. That is precisely the major debate surrounding Real Madrid today. It is not about questioning Mbappé's quality, which would be absurd. It is about analyzing whether, at this specific moment, with the current squad, with existing sporting needs, and with the evolution of the project, his continuity represents the best possible decision for the club's future. Real Madrid is going through a phase of transition and redefinition. As happens periodically in major institutions, there comes a moment when it is necessary to reassess priorities, adjust structures, and make decisions that not only respond to the present but also positively shape the future. The White Club has always stood out for its ability to anticipate change, reinvent itself when necessary, and maintain competitiveness from one generation to the next. In this context, the reflection on Mbappé takes on a much deeper dimension than the simple continuity of a star player. The question is not purely sporting. It is also strategic, economic, institutional, and even philosophical. What kind of team does Real Madrid want to build for the next decade? One based on the centrality of a single superstar? Or one built on a robust, balanced, and versatile collective? Because if there is one thing that has historically defined Real Madrid in its most successful eras, it is its ability to combine individual talent with an impeccable collective structure. The club's great dynasties were not built solely around one name, but on the strength of a unit. A unit where stars shone, yes, but always within a perfectly designed system. Today, a significant part of the Madrid fanbase believes that the team needs precisely that, to recover certain identity traits that have been fundamental to its greatest triumphs. Balance between lines. Sustained intensity over 90 minutes. Defensive solidarity. Collective commitment. The ability to compete as a single unit in any scenario and against any opponent. These qualities do not always depend on the presence or absence of a specific player, but they can be influenced by the way a team is structured around certain figures. When a project revolves excessively around a single star, there is a risk of losing part of that collective harmony that so often makes the difference at the elite level. That is why Florentino Perez is facing one of the most decisive decisions of recent years. A decision that goes far beyond a simple transfer operation. This is not just about accepting or rejecting an extraordinary offer. It is about defining the strategic direction of Real Madrid at a crucial stage of its evolution. The hypothetical proposal coming from Saudi Arabia, valued at €280 million, represents an opportunity of enormous magnitude. One of those rare occasions that appear only occasionally in a club's history. A figure of this level would not only have an immediate economic impact, but would also open the door to a profound reshaping of the sporting project. Accepting such an offer would allow Real Madrid to enter a new phase with extraordinary resources. Resources that could be allocated to strengthening multiple positions, balancing the squad, securing key contract renewals, and continuing to build a team with a solid foundation for the years ahead. It would, in essence, be a bet on a more collective model. A model in which responsibility is distributed among several figures. A team less dependent on a single reference point and more capable of adapting to different competitive contexts. A side where collective strength prevails over individual dependency. In addition, from a tactical perspective, Mbappé's departure could facilitate a more harmonious restructuring of the team. It would allow the coaching staff to design a more balanced system, with better defined roles and a more even distribution of effort across all phases of the game. This would not be about replacing Mbappé with a single player. That would be impossible. Players of his level are virtually irreplaceable. It would rather be about redistributing his influence among several profiles who, together, could raise the team's overall performance. Of course, rejecting the offer would also have a perfectly valid logic. Keeping Mbappé would mean continuing to bet on one of the greatest talents in world football. It would imply trusting that, over time, the project will fully adapt to his characteristics and that the team will reach its peak potential with him as its central reference. It would not be an irrational decision. On the contrary, many clubs in the world would not hesitate for a second to build their entire project around a player like Mbappé. His ability to decide matches, attract sponsors, generate global impact, and lead on the pitch is unquestionable. However, every major decision carries risks. And in this case, the main risk lies in excessive dependence. When a team places too much of its expectation on a single player, it exposes itself to a clear vulnerability. Injuries, dips in form, or even simple tactical mismatches can have a much greater impact on collective performance. That is why the decision must be approached from a broad perspective. Not only assessing the immediate present, but projecting its consequences over the medium and long term. Real Madrid cannot afford to think only about next season. It must think about the next 5, 7, or even 10 years. The question, in reality, is simple to formulate, although extremely complex to answer. What does Real Madrid need to dominate the next decade? Does it need a great star around whom the entire project revolves? Or does it need a perfectly assembled collective, capable of competing at the highest level regardless of context, opponent, or circumstance? More and more voices lean toward the second option. the construction of a more balanced, more complete team, less conditioned by the presence of a single figure. A team capable of imposing its style, its rhythm, and its identity through the collective. Because, in the end, the great dynasties of modern football have shared one common trait: the strength of the unit. Even when they featured extraordinary players, their true power lay in cohesion, structural clarity, and the complementarity of their parts. Real Madrid knows this formula well. Its most glorious eras have emerged when the club has managed to combine talent, balance, leadership, and competitive spirit. When each player understood their role and executed it with excellence. When the collective enhanced individual brilliance, rather than the other way around. In that sense, Mbappé's potential sale should not be interpreted as a surrender, nor as the end of a dream, and certainly not as an institutional defeat. It could represent, in fact, the beginning of a new era. An era marked by more rational planning. A more balanced squad. A sporting structure designed to maximize collective performance. A stronger and more sustainable identity over time. With €280 million, the club would have room to strengthen several key areas, secure the future of its young talents, and continue building a squad capable of competing at the highest level for many years. Real Madrid's greatness has always come from its ability to evolve. From making difficult decisions when context demands it. From placing the badge above any individual name, no matter how illustrious. That mindset is precisely what has allowed the club to remain at the top for so many decades. No player, however extraordinary, is above the institution. That has always been one of Real Madrid's core principles. And it will likely remain so. Therefore, if such an operation were to take place, the real challenge would not be managing the departure of a star player. The real challenge would be turning that opportunity into a way to further strengthen the team and lay the foundations of a new winning cycle. Football history is full of decisions that marked a turning point. Transfers that seemed traumatic at the time but, in hindsight, became positive catalysts for change. There are also examples in the opposite direction. That is why execution is what ultimately matters. If Real Madrid decides to sell, it must reinvest with intelligence, vision, and coherence. Signing big names alone will not be enough. It will be necessary to build a balanced squad, with complementary profiles and a clear tactical idea. If it decides to keep Mbappé, it must continue working to surround him with the ideal context. An environment that enhances his strengths without compromising the team's overall balance. Both paths are valid. Both can lead to success. Both involve risks and opportunities. What matters most is that the decision is guided by a clear strategic vision, not by emotion or short-term circumstances. Because, ultimately, the question is no longer just whether Mbappé should stay or leave. The real question is what kind of future Real Madrid wants to build. A future centered on the brilliance of a superstar? Or a future based on the strength of an imposing collective? That answer will largely define the next great era of the club. And, as so many times in its history, Real Madrid will have to show why it remains the most demanding, ambitious, and visionary institution in world football.